Hello, this is a video about the article What's in a Name by Yosef Mgeni, who was published in the St. Paul Almanac. Before we begin to read the essay, let's do some of the pre-reading strategies. So, first we can brainstorm about the title. What's in a name? Well, I think about the significance of names as they relate to our family. That's some of the things maybe you've been thinking about when you were writing your narrative essay about your name. I think about how the way we name things says something about how we perceive them, what we think about them. And then I think kind of literally, what's in a name? Well, it's comprised of a lot of different letters and sounds and syllables. So that's some stuff to get my brain thinking about what's in a name. And then let's think about the author. So let's go and look at some information about the author. So if you Google the author, you find his page with his biography, and you see a nice picture of the author. And then you have a pronunciation guide, Yosef Mgeni. And then we have information about him. Mr. Mgeni has spent decades in leadership positions with community-based organizations, serving low-income persons and communities of color as an administrator, community organizer, college instructor, policy analyst, educator, planner, development director, award-winning journalist, producer, and foundation senior program officer. So later in this course, you'll learn about something called ethos, and that's the person's believability and credibility. And if you read all of those different definitions of the author's roles in society, you might begin to feel like what he's writing is really important or credible. So it looks like we're skimming it a little bit. He's done volunteer work to counter racism. He's been on the board of directors of local and national progressive organizations. So organizations that are about change making and moving forward. To progress is to move forward. And it looks like he is also part of a community organization called St. Paul Strong. Okay, so now we know a little bit about him, and we can start to think like, okay, we know that he's kind of interested in the community. He's interested in things that are not racist. He's an educator. And we can go into our essay thinking a little bit about those bits of information that we know about him. So you're going to be answering questions about this as well. Another pre-reading strategy that you can do is to look at the questions at the end of the article or that are posted after the article. So you want to look at the questions, and here are some of the questions you're going to be asked to answer. The first are reading skills questions, reading comprehension questions, questions that ask you to show that you've understood the article, and skills questions, which are asking you to practice the strategies for reading. So you're going to be asked, what pre-reading strategy did you do before reading this article? So maybe as this video went along, you thought about the title. Maybe you looked up more information about the author or really thought about the information that I showed you. Things like that. You can also look in this module at more of the strategies that are available. Then the question, does the author feel that he is able to have one stable identity? Why or why not? So you're going to think about, does he feel like he can just be one thing in society, one aspect of himself at all times? Number 3, what does the author realize about racism when he's called an American, when he's traveling overseas? And what, if any, personal connections or questions do you have about this article? So you can see that the last question is a little bit easier. You're just going to be reading it for any connections you can make to the author or the article. And if you notice that you're not making a lot of connections, that's okay too. You can say, I've never had this experience. My experience has been more like, and then state that. Then you have the questions which are about reading like a writer, looking at this and thinking about what it can teach you about writing. So the first question is, what makes the essay What's in a Name an analytical essay? And then the next question is, how The author, Yusuf M. Jenny, incorporates stories or narrative into his analytical essay. So let's look at the article itself. Okay, and we'll look together at the first several paragraphs, and then you will be asked to read the rest on your own and annotate it as you go along. So, all over America, Negro boys and girls are growing into stunted maturity, trying desperately to find a place to stand, and the wonder is not that so many are ruined, but that so many survive. And this is a quotation by James Baldwin, who is an African-American author. So the author of this piece says, growing up as young Black men in St. Paul's Rondo neighborhood, we learned a lot from the generation of Black men who preceded us. We, like they before us, were simply known as the Rondo Boys. Rondo was where we learned to survive, to grow and develop. It was where we learned the values of our extended family membership, where we fell in love and got our hearts broken. It's also where we learned what's in a name. So let's annotate that a bit. We're going to write in the margins. Make sure that you have clicked on the part that you would actually like to annotate. Okay, so here we go. All right, we're going to say new comment. Okay, so we learned that the author's neighborhood really defined him. So that his neighborhood community was something that was really, really important to him. Okay, it's where he learned the value of extended family membership. It's where all of the events of growing up and growing older happened. And then we learned that there was like a name, there's a label that they were called, and it was Rondo Boys. So we're beginning to get a sense that this is about naming as labeling. And we also learn that this is an analytical essay. So it begins with a bit of narrative, a bit of storytelling. We learn that they were called the Rondo Boys. And then we have a sort of a light touch thesis statement. We learn that the main idea is that he's going to be talking about what's in a name, just like his title says. And an analytical essay, and this is an analytical essay, is an essay that breaks down a concept into different parts. So he's talked about the naming of him and then also his friends as Rondo Boys, and then we're going to see what other naming and labeling he talks about as things go on. When you're annotating, if your neighborhood was something that's important to you, you might write that down. So my neighborhood community was less important to me than my school and church community. This is true. This was true for me for many years when I was growing up. So you can think about is this true for you? Did you have like a name? Did your family members or peers or others in the neighborhood have like a name for you and your group of friends? Anything you can connect to, you can do a personal connection in the margin there if that feels relevant to you. In my lifetime, I have been legally classified on official documents as colored, Negro, Black, Afro-American, African-American, with and without a hyphen, and American. As a result, you will have to forgive me if at times I seem somewhat schizophrenic. As evidence of the residue from the negative forces of racism and oppression that surround and shape us, I truly believe that most Black people in America are more or less schizophrenic. So let's pause there. First, we can do in the margins a little bit of a summary or maybe like a definition of terms. So schizophrenia is a mental disorder that he's using here to represent having multiple different identities, multiple different ways of having to exist in the world. Multiple identities. And you could think, I have a very good friend who has schizophrenia, and I think that she would probably take offense to this term being used in this particular way, as using the mental disorder to represent the idea of of having multiple different identities in the world. It's something that's done all the time, but you can think about whether you feel like that's good or that's not. Okay, so we've sort of defined that term there, and then we're thinking about what he means by that being Black in America means being labeled in many different ways. Okay, I've grown up and interacted throughout my life with Black people who had one personality for dealing with white folks who were strangers, another for dealing with white people who were supervisors, another for dealing with Black folks, one for the police and other authorities, and a few more that sprang up almost without prompting, depending on the circumstance and who the encounter involved. This ability to successfully navigate what author Richard Wright referred to as the cliff-like margins of many cultures would serve not only as a survival skill, but truly as one of the wonders of Blackness, through which people of African descent not only survive, but grow and develop. So he's talking about how the multiple labels are necessary for survival. And here I'd also add the term code switching is one way to talk about how we change our self-presentation depending on our sense of audience. This is something that's true for writing essays as well. Essentially, you are thinking about who's reading your essay, and you're writing to influence or appeal to that reader. So he's talking about how all these different labels become a necessary characteristic of being Black in America. Okay, and you can also see that he's beginning to analyze. So he's not just talking about his experience. He's starting with his experience, but he's making a comment about his ideas about naming. And he's even bringing in another author to support his ideas. To be Black in this society and successfully navigate the social, political, cultural, and economic landscape that surrounds us, one needs at times to be a chameleon. There's another way of saying shifting identity, recognizing when it is necessary for survival to tell the truth or to tell folks what they think they want to hear, and knowing when to duck beneath the radar so as not to draw unnecessary attention to oneself. This is not to suggest that one become compliant or assimilate, but rather that one's journey through life, and indeed each day, can be delayed indefinitely, altered abruptly, ended, or made more bearable in direct proportion to one's ability to navigate, sense, adapt, prevent, or react to multiple situations concurrently, particularly when they involve whites with power in our society. Okay, there's a lot here. So here he's talking, I think this is a good opportunity to do an annotation that involves vocabulary. So we can go, if you want, to the home area, and you can highlight vocabulary words: chameleon, assimilate, let's see, maybe direct proportion, navigate, and then you can go back to review. And then chameleon, we know, is the animal that changes colors based on its environment. Okay, and if you didn't know that, you can just type it into your browser and get a definition, or you can go online. And it talks about it being a lizard. It's an important detail which you might want to put in as well. And then you have other words like assimilate, which means fit in. Direct proportion, that's part in relation to the whole. So one thing as it relates to another thing, equivalently, if it's in direct proportion. To navigate is to handle or to move through. So you can define as many vocab words as you don't know. Really, you should get in the habit of defining words to help you to understand your readings. Next, you're going to read about an experience the author had being called an American and how that influenced him. And then you'll just continue to read the essay to see what his overall point about naming is. Good luck.